Okay, so I've spent the past week cleaning and painting parts to get ahead for this video. So the first part of this video, we're going to put all these parts back on the motor, and then I'm going to spend some time looking at my carbs. Now they're in pretty good shape, they just need a quick cleanup and a little bit of paint to match the motor. So we're going to start with this stuff and then see where it takes us. The starter needed a simple cleaning and a few coats of black engine paint, and I believe I added a couple coats of clear as well. Reinstall was reverse of removal. Simply push it through the starter hole and then attach the rear bracket. Honda calls this part the upper thermostat assembly, and what it is the thermostat housing, 2 water pipes, and 2 flanges, all held together with O-rings. Now I didn't break it all the way down because it wasn't leaking to begin with, but I am replacing the 2 O-rings that attach the upper thermostat assembly to the tops of the heads. I also repainted them with matching engine enamel and engine clear. One thing I almost forgot to do was to reattach the tachometer cable to this little connector right behind the fan. Don't forget to do this, because if you forget about it and start installing the front engine mount, you're going to have to take that all back off. Now on with the front engine bracket, which I recoated with frame paint and a couple coats of clear, and it just bolts the motor with a few bolts. Pretty straightforward. So next what I need to do is reinstall the radiator, which starts with installing these little rubber O-rings that mount the radiator to the engine, and I guess they're vibration dampeners that keep from damaging the radiator during engine use. I don't really know why you can't bolt a radiator directly to the engine. Maybe it just keeps the radiator from falling off. Who knows? Now this coolant pipe that I'm about to install connects the lower radiator hose to the water pump. In my opinion, this is probably the only real questionable design part of this engine, and I'm no engineer, so I couldn't give you an idea of any other alternative way to do it, but this coolant pipe has had a history of leaking right where the pipe meets the water pump. And it's not just my engine, I've seen it on others. So I don't have any recommendations or any ideas how to keep it from leaking, but I'm sure at some point during the operation of this brand new engine, it's going to leak right there. Now I'm going by the book on this one to keep this pipe from leaking. I've got a new O-ring, I'm clamping down the pipe accordingly, and I'm making sure that the pipe is straight aligned inside the water pump. But I have seen occasions where this thing will still leak initially on starting the engine, and can leak from time to time during operation in the future. Next I need to install this little panel thingy that, I don't know what it does. I guess it just keeps crap out of the middle of the engine. But what passes through it are a few coolant hoses and 2 sensor wires. So this panel thingy bolts to the upper thermostat assembly, and once you've got all these pieces up there, everything can be bolted down at once. pretty easy. So the last thing I'm doing here is reconnecting the hose that connects the thermostat housing to the water pump. And this is one you don't want to forget, because if this isn't tightened down, when you start the engine and you discover there's a leak, that one's hard to get to once the motor's back in the bike. So in case I haven't done enough yet, it's time to clean and paint some parts. This time we're looking at the carburetors. So I'm taping off the upper part of the carburetor. It's a polished aluminum piece that I'd like to keep polished in aluminum and not painted. I'm also taping off the intake ports to the carbs. Now this is a first round coat of high temperature primer. I actually ended up only doing one thick coat of primer on these. It didn't seem pertinent to do multiple heavy coats of primer. These things are difficult as it is to sand, so I think relying on one coat was enough. Now that the primer's dry, I'm going to be applying a semi-gloss black paint, and here we go. If I recall correctly, I ended up applying 2 or 3 coats of paint to the carburetors. So now that the motor's back together, I want to pop off these valve covers to give them a good polishing. Since I'm not equipped for polishing in my garage, I stopped by my dad's to use his polishing wheel. The process is pretty straightforward, and fortunately I had a head start with these valve covers since they weren't in too bad a shape. All you do is get your polishing wheel, some compound, typically a rubbing and a buffing compound, and with a little patience you can polish these valve covers to a pretty good shine. You know what? Not too bad for a first pass. Okay, here's a quick side-by-side comparison, and an hour later, here they are done. Pretty happy with the result. Didn't take a whole lot of effort, and I think they're going to look great on the engine. And finally, reinstallation is reverse of removal. I didn't have to, but I went ahead and replaced all of the valve cover gaskets. I think I did them not too long ago, and they are rubber, which means that they can be removed and reinstalled a few times, but I went ahead and did it anyway. So now that the carbs are dry, it's time to reinstall them. These V-twin Keihin carbs, I believe that's how you pronounce it, basically sandwiched together between 2 sets of brackets and are pretty easy to reinstall and maintain. The trickiest part of putting these carbs back together is this little tiny choke spring that links the 2 carburetor chokes to each other. And what this spring does is allow the chokes to open and close in synchronization. So the final real piece here is installing the intake filters, and the carbs are ready to go back on the motor. Alright, and that concludes part 9 of the Honda CX500 Moto Fugazi build. See you next time. Thanks for watching.